All right. Was anyone at NodeConf in Oakland? Anybody? Okay, great. So this is better. That's great. That's a bright answer. So I gave a kind of early draft version of this talk there, but this is way better. So you guys, I haven't spoiled anything for you. And yeah, let's get into it. This is the Node way. The Node way, has anyone heard this phrase? Maybe seen it somewhere, maybe seen it kind of in passing. And it gets thrown around a lot. It's not really talked about as a kind of thing. But it's definitely used just out in the open. A few examples. On NPM, when they gave a roadmap for their registry, they mentioned that the Node way is all about building small single-purpose modules and how much they love it. But then Step, this control flow library, talks about how it does control flow the Node way. So on one hand, the Node way is a kind of structural mentality. And then the other, it's a way to do asynchronous control flow. And then even again here on NPM FAQ, they mentioned the Node way handed down from the ancient times of Node 0.3. Granted, I don't know if you guys can see that, but the question that this was an answer to is node modules is the name of my deity's arch rival and a forbidden word in my religion. Can I change that to a different folder? So a little tongue-in-cheek, obviously. And it's nice to know that these are the people maintaining a pretty large part of the internet. But yeah, it kind of brings up this question, what do these people mean? What is the Node way? Is it structural? Is it something about async? Is it all these things? Is it none of them? And that's really what I've been kind of trying to figure out for the last year. Not like full time, don't worry, I haven't been just like sitting in a room, but I have been kind of wondering, since the first time I saw that. So that's what I'm going to try and kind of explain today, is what is the Node way. And to really do that, I want to go back a little bit to how I got started with Node. My name is Fred Schopp, by the way. I work at Box. And I've been there since about 2013 when we really started working with Node. And so that was kind of really when I started getting serious about it. We started considering Node as a pretty significant part of our architecture around that time, as a way to kind of move away from this giant monolith and into a more service-oriented architecture. And so we started looking at Node. And I'd worked with Node before. I'd built a few side projects. But people at Box were like, Fred, that's great, but we're not going to leverage an entire company infrastructure on your side projects. And okay, that's fair. So we started taking it pretty seriously. And I'll admit, that's me at this point. I'm very new. I can poke around, but I can't really build much. And so to get a better feel, we started talking to kind of everyone we can talk to. We started talking to Yahoo at the time was really kind of at the front of it, doing some awesome stuff. PayPal, the Kraken team, LinkedIn, Adam Crabtree was there with his mobile team. So just everyone we could talk to who to us looked like that. I mean, they were doing all this crazy stuff, building frameworks, and we were kind of blown away. And the one thing I remember from it is that having talked to them, you can kind of just sense that they knew what they were talking about. It wasn't so much that they were better at JavaScript or that they knew about all the cool new modules, but it was more they just like so effortlessly talked about and wrote code and wrote code that explained things that we were always just struggling with day after day. The things, it's like learning a new language and then trying to talk to someone who's incredibly fluent. And you think you're hot stuff, you like learn, the numbers and the alphabet, and then just you realize very quickly how little you know. That's how we felt. And so that kind of always stuck with me. Even as we kept building and kept learning, it was this kind of feeling like, how can I get from A to B? How can I not just learn more, but also get the mentality, get the kind of way to write code and write modules? And so that stuck with me, and I kept kind of, for the next year, trying to figure this out. So as we were building stuff, as we were kind of building out our architecture in Node, I started just writing down everything that I kind of encountered that was weird or that looked interesting, that surprised me. I did a deep dive into Require that was very popular. Talked about monkey patching, the weird ways you can kind of get into the module cache, and also just simple design patterns and how to build a singleton or a custom type or a factory. So that was the kind of stuff I was looking at, but it's still, it scratched an itch, but it wasn't really I was still poking at the full picture. I still didn't really get the full picture. I wasn't presenting it, and that was really what I had set out to do. So fast forward to the end of last year, beginning of this year, I kind of, again, sat in a room all by myself and tried to figure out what the Node way really is. What was the full picture I was trying to get at? And earlier this year, I released this site. And so has anyone seen this online anywhere? Okay, a few people. That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, so this has been basically the summation of all of that work, and that journey has been this kind of look at trying to codify and put into one place an explanation of what the node way is, or at least my interpretation of that. It's a lot of its opinion. It could be wrong. You might not agree. That's totally cool. The idea is to just get something out there that represents everything about writing Node to help people get from beginner to master much quicker. So today I want to kind of talk about what that is, give a brief intro, and at least walk through some of the more exciting parts. This was where the talk kind of fell flat at NodeConf because I ran out of time. It was late getting started, so I really just breezed through it, which kind of sucked because to get into the exciting parts, you have to set them up, and then so basically it was all the very intro stuff that like anyone could learn on day one. So I'm really excited to actually give a real kind of more in-depth deep dive. So there are 3 different parts, at least that I could kind of summarize everything into about Node. One part is structure. Node really doesn't give you that much in terms of structure. You could write a file that says Randall smells or something, and that would be a Node application. I mean, that's really it. But then from that idea, people have built entire companies off of that. I mean, entire websites are powered by that one idea of running a file with Node. So how, given nothing, how do you build something like that in a safe, maintainable way? The other thing is async. Most of us come to Node for its abilities asynchronously. The things it can do with I/O and its concurrent kind of model, that's why it's powerful. But that comes with a certain kind of shift of view as compared to how people normally build applications, especially web servers. So how does that affect what you're building and how you build it well? And then the last thing is community. So I've said this before, and I stand by it. I think it's impossible to build Node in a bubble. It's impossible to not interact with the community in some way, either by installing a module that someone's built, looking at GitHub issues, interacting with the community on Twitter or something. It's one kind of big community, and how does that affect the development of the actual software you write? Because it does. So those are the kind of 3 things I wanted to talk about and actually dig into a little bit. The first one being structure. So I mentioned that Node doesn't give you much, and that's true. When people talk about the structure of Node, when they talk about the Node way, one of the most popular things that they usually, or most common at least, that they usually mean is that Node is all about building small single-purpose modules. That was what NPM wrote in their blog post, pretty much verbatim. And this idea comes with a lot of really significant benefits. One of it being that when you're building something, you're forced by that separation to build something that's modular, reusable. You can't really couple yourself when you're building these separate modules. You can, but it's a lot harder. You kind of have to go out of your way. So as a developer, you get a lot more code reuse out of that fact alone. And then as a user of those modules, you're able to choose the best tool for the job. Gone are the days of using just one library, using underscore or jQuery for everything you do on Node. I mean, not that ever was a day in Node, but that never really came across because it's so easy to choose these small tools. NPM allows you to manage all these dependencies, install them with ease, just a single line on the command line. And so that really gives you a lot of power and a lot of choice in terms of what you want to do and what tools you want to use. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to like refactor out jQuery or underscore from their code base. It's impossible. No one actually does it. But if you're using these small, simple tools and you want to upgrade one, swap it out, super simple, or at least a lot simpler than it would be if it was a part of some giant monolithic framework. And lastly, what's kind of cool about this is that the only way for the NPM ecosystem really to work is by leveraging composition, and that is as opposed to inheritance. So inheritance being the normal object-oriented model. You have your base class, which is subclass, subclasses, and then on down the list, where everything kind of modifies that base class. That really doesn't translate to NPM at all. It would be impossible. Because the way NPM does versioning with Semver, it really is impossible to maintain that idea of what's inside. For inheritance to work properly, you need to know what you're modifying, what you're clicking into. So you could rewrite your entire app and then just bump the patch because you haven't changed anything. So you've bumped this very minor version number. And then if you've inherited that, suddenly the entire architecture is different and your module falls apart. This isn't sustainable. And so that's why usually, almost across the board, people reach for composition. Composition being that instead of inheriting from these tools and using them in that way, you are composing all these tools together to create something complex. Definitely, yeah, complexity via composition. So instead of inheriting from a tool, you are using that tool. Good example, I can't think of an example, but yeah, I think everyone gets what I mean by that. Yeah, cool. Let's talk about async. It's why most of us find Node. I used to have a lot of slides on what's cool about async, but I think that's probably what people get the most, and it kind of takes a while. So just know that it's really good at I/O, really bad at computation. If you want to learn more, Google it or come talk to me. That could be a whole talk on its own, and I don't think I have the time. But one thing that I think is really important that sometimes gets missed is that you have to invest in clean async. This is probably the easiest way and most kind of beginner move is to not invest in this, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in callback hell. It's a real thing. Just indentation out to a second page. It's real and it's terrible. So how do you do this? What is clean async? There's a few different kind of tips you can use, tips and tricks that help you kind of mitigate this. One being to return early. So this is a very kind of contrived example, and it doesn't illustrate it as well. But to really illustrate it, I mean, again, you need 3 pages. But the idea is that instead of nesting all these ifs and elses and these just very complicated flows, the second you know that you're done, you get out of there. So on the right, you know that it's, what is this example? If it's less than 0, you know it's false. Get out of there. If it's more than 100, get out of there. While it doesn't really make a huge difference here, you could even, I mean, the complexity is the same. Imagine here there's a callback. Something asynchronous happens. All of a sudden you start indenting again, but that's okay because otherwise it would be all the way in the middle of the function, and then maybe return false is also a callback. So now all of a sudden you have to follow this around. It becomes messy very quickly. So while this is contrived, you can kind of see how it would become a mess very fast. The other thing you can do is get help with your control flow. There's nothing wrong with that. Promises, async module, there's a ton of different options for basically getting you away from just bare callbacks if you're doing something complex. So there's no reason to basically create your own way to call a bunch of callbacks in parallel and then make sure that you get the right response and that they all come back into one callback. It's a very complex thing to do on your own. And luckily there are these modules there to help you. So promises, callbacks, whatever you want to do, you should still get help if you need it. And then let's talk about community. So like I said, impossible to write Node JavaScript in a bubble. And you shouldn't really. There's this entire ecosystem out there. There's no reason to be out on your own. With the tool that NPM is and the ecosystem it gives you access to, there's no reason to shy away from that. I guarantee you, if you're thinking of some module, someone's already built it, they've named it, they've written tests for it, hopefully. It could be a piece of crap, who knows. But the point is there's something out there for you to at least start with. If you want to use that, great. If you want to work with that owner to make it better, or if you finally decide to go out on your own and rebuild the wheel to be better, that's okay too. But it's out there, and to shy away from that is a loss of everyone's kind of productivity and time. The other thing that can be a little bit kind of new and, I don't know, at least different, is that you're a part of this community now, especially when you start publishing modules. And that means you're not just writing code for you and your team, you're writing code for the entire world to look at. So document it, make it easy to use, make it easy to read. Basically, write it for that stranger who's just followed along some link and found your module. It's easy to not document anything, but it's so much more valuable for everyone, including yourself, to have just a module that's easy to understand, easy to use, has a very reusable kind of interface. And I mentioned this before, embrace the community. There's everyone out there is really, I mean, you're all here, this is awesome. Everyone out there really wants to help. Node School is blowing up. These meetups are great. I mean, there's just no reason not to embrace it like you all are doing, so nice job. And that's it. So that's me, that's where I work, come talk to me, and the website is thenodeway.io, but if you just Google it, it should come up. A ton more stuff that I didn't talk about, and a little bit more in detail than I had time for here, but it's really cool, and check it out. Thank you. I have a little bit of time.